Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about cultural beliefs and practices about death and dying. So the group members for Group 7 is me, Miriam Adenwala, Isabel Andea, Hannah Buta, and Luis Hernandez.
Our first research question is, how do beliefs about dying and death vary between different cultures and countries?
Our second question is, what is the death system in the United States?
And our third question is, what are the different cultural perspectives on euthanasia?
And our fourth question is, what ritual regarding death are performed by different cultures?
As an introduction, for some background information, death, dying, and grieving are part of the transition from the beginning of life to the end of life.
The last stage of life is relevant in development. Throughout a person's life, they will have different views about death.
To better understand death and dying, we can look to Kubler-Ross's grief cycle. The cycle has 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
When dealing with death, people go through most or all of these stages from page 617 of Lifespan Development. The grief cycles give people a sense of perceived control and denial.
To start off, we will talk about Chang's study from 2015 about practices and behaviors as death approaches. As many behaviors and practices are shared between cultures, there are also many differences that set them apart from each other. Such behaviors and practices include not wanting to have an end-of-life discussion, division of roles within the family, and behavior at the time of death, near death. At the end-of-life discussions, Japan had the least amount of members that were unwilling to partake in the end-of-life discussions, followed by Korea and then Taiwan. There were 2 main reasons for this. First one is that the cultures believe that saying things about death will come true, and it's better to have a bad life than a good death. In the division within the roles of the family in Korea and Taiwan, the oldest or the head of the family are the first to hear the news, and they're the ones that break the news to the rest of the family. For behavior in Japanese culture, it is frowned upon to express emotions out loud, while in Taiwanese and Korean cultures, it is respectful to express those emotions. Next slide, please. In Walter's research paper from 2012 on the differences in death management, there were cultural differences in the regarding of death management in member society, with factors including individual versus collectivism, religion, and status. Countries like the United States have high levels of individualism, where medical and research ethics revolve around the informed consent of the individual. Religion plays a large role in death management and death practices. Some religions allow for the cremation and donation of organs after death, while some do not. Status also is a big factor. Societies have standards for applying status to different members of the country, old versus young, poor versus rich. Specifically in the Netherlands, euthanasia involves the patient's household and the doctor, and there is a low status differentiation between doctor and patient. Other factor is urbanization. Doctors, funeral directors, social workers, and therapists all have a role in death management. And migration. Migrants to the United States are more likely to forego traditional death practices, languages, and previous identities. Migrants to other countries are more likely to go back to their country of origin. Next slide.
In the United States, there's a death system that involves people such as funeral directors, police, healthcare workers, firefighters, and more. All these people do service work that have some sort of roles in the death system. Places of dying or dead or deceased include hospitals, funeral homes, cemeteries, memorials, or battlefields. Family members may harbor superstitions or simply memories of a room or area where a loved one had died. Certain holidays like Memorial Day or Halloween in the United States culture, the Day of Dead in Mexican culture, or All Saints Day or Good Friday among Christians are associated with the time to reflect upon or remember the dead. In the United States, prisons are one of the most involved system in the death system, and healthcare is something that they don't get access to. So in the journal Social Work in the End of Life and Palliative Care, a study was conducted at 3 prisons for barriers associated with the implementation of an advanced care system. This project implemented last steps, which is basically 60 years of age, frail, they can get access to medical care. So the National Violent Death Reporting System is a system used all over the United States, all 50 states, and it is an electronic data collecting system. The National Violent Death Reporting System collects facts from death certificates, medical exam reports, law enforcement reports, and toxicology into one anonymous database. It is served to reduce human error, improve the precision of medical histories feeding into the death record, and reduce to ask certain other related questions. It is a way for individuals to share self-identification regardless of how they died or their circumstances of death. So standards are needed to address classification systems, terminologies, and data, and they interchange among localities, states, and centers for disease control and prevention. These standards will require establishing a fixed set of core questions regardless of their death. And this is from the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics.
Now I'll talk about some of the cultural perspectives on euthanasia. Euthanasia can be referred to as easy death, as stated on page 611 of our textbook. Euthanasia is the act of painlessly ending the lives of individuals who are suffering from incurable disease or severe disability. The process involves a doctor who administers a lethal injection to the patient. There are 2 different types of euthanasia. The first is called passive euthanasia, and this is when a patient stops their life-sustaining treatment. The second is called active euthanasia. This occurs when a lethal dose of medication is given to the patient. Assisted suicide is another method that ends a patient's life where the patient self-administers the lethal medication. Advanced care planning is the process of communicating to doctors about euthanasia or assisted suicide. To keep track of the advanced care plan, the living will is created, which is the legal document containing the patient's wishes. Lastly, I'll describe some of the controversies about euthanasia. Euthanasia is legal in Belgium, Colombia, and other countries, but it is illegal in the United States. Assisted suicide is legal in Belgium, Canada, Finland, Luxembourg, and more. It is also allowed in California, Colorado, and many other states. Euthanasia and assisted suicide are considered crimes where they are legal. From a Western perspective, 69% of Americans believe that euthanasia should be legal. 51% would consider it if they were terminally ill, and 50% say that it's morally acceptable. On page 39 of Ethical Issues when Working with Terminally Ill People, euthanasia has strong cultural and spiritual undertones. This leads to moral and legal debates in society, which spark reforms in several areas of the law. Next slide. Now I'll explain the culture of euthanasia in Indonesia. As stated in a journal called Euthanasia from the Perspective of Indonesian Norms, Indonesian healthcare is shifting from targeted treatments. Instead, they are focusing on holistic care, patient recovery, and disease prevention. Many Indonesians are hesitant to support euthanasia as it violates Indonesian laws. Article 10 of the Indonesia Medical Code of Ethics says that doctors must remember their obligation to protect other people's lives. From this perspective, euthanasia goes against what the medical code stands for.
I will be talking about the cultural rituals about death. Let's start off with cultural variations. Cultural variations are to distinguish death and dying, stated on page 609 in the Lifespan textbook. Robert talks about 5 interesting things about the death system, which are people, places, time, objects, and symbols. Now, almost all society and history have different religions and beliefs about death. When it comes to places and whatnot, you can never really tell where their culture celebrates the death of someone they knew or loved. Next, I'll talk about the ancient Greek life. To the ancient Greeks, death to them was a life full of glory. The Greeks would say that death in times of war, food shortages, and plague have taken a toll. In America, Americans are known to control from early in life thinking that they're immoral. But in the US, death of someone close to you is commonly talked about. Lastly, death can be seen as a punishment for another's sin or just a judgment from God. Some even embrace death and welcome it, or despise it and fear it. When people welcome death, it's that they may seem like it's suitable end to living a fulfilled life. Next slide, please. Continuing on, I will now explain the two different types of cultural rituals on afterlife death. The cultures are South Asian Buddhism and Chinese culture. I'm going to start off with the culture of the afterlife of South Asian Buddhism. In the journal Death and Afterlife, the Views of South Asian Buddhism, Scalford states that there is a standard sense on the afterlife in which spirit could survive in physical death. Starting with Brahmal is to those who believe in one God. Next is survival of humanity, and it matters a lot more to them because of the life without availability of future generations. Future generations is known to constitute the nature of and values of one's life. The next culture ritual are the Chinese culture. In the journal article Good Death in Chinese Culture, Mach states that Chinese people are more concerned about their relationship all around. Next is the harmonious death model, which includes both tangible and spiritual relationships. Harmonious death includes gods and their ancestors in the afterlife. Lastly, other Asian communities maintain Confucian value, stated by Mu. Confucian value is the way where they value human beings to be fundamentally good, teachable, and improvable.
To summarize our presentation, I'll talk about our group's findings. After doing research, we learned that every culture has its own way of observing, celebrating, or coping with the death of loved ones. Cultural beliefs, perspectives, and practices all shape the approaches we have towards death, and whether we see it as a positive or a negative thing.
Next, I'll be saying which sources are most reliable. We believe the most reliable sources are the ones we talked about in each of our slides, which all correlate to each of our questions. Those sources make it reliable because it is important to us to know about the different aspects of death and dying.
Next, I'll be talking about how do death and dying affect adulthood. So death and dying are a part of life, and as we all may know, it is bound to happen, it's inevitable. It's important to learn how to cope with death and dying with factors of cultural beliefs, family responsibilities, and personal experiences.
We'll now be talking about our final thoughts on death. It is interesting how different cultures deal with death with members of their society. It allows us to experience these cultural attitudes and practices secondhandly, and allows us to understand past, present, and future death practices. Thank you.
Those were our references, and thank you guys for listening.